That night, the lights on the dining table were bright, but inside my chest, everything had gone dark. At 60 years of age, I thought I had seen enough storms of life, yet nothing had prepared me for the moment when my own dignity was torn apart in front of people who once called me family. The chairs were filled, laughter echoed around, and glasses clinked like it was a night of joy. But in the middle of that celebration, I sat quietly, almost invisible. My hands trembled slightly, not because of my age, but because of the words that were about to strike me harder than any illness, any poverty, or any tragedy I had ever faced. He leaned back in his chair, my son-in-law, smiling with arrogance that didn't belong in the house I had built with my sweat. He looked at me as though I was less than the man who had raised his wife, less than the father who had given her life, less than the years I had lived and sacrificed. And then, with a smirk, he said it, the words that burned through my ears and cut into my heart like a knife. "Old man, maybe you should keep quiet. This is not your table anymore." Silence spread faster than a disease. Forks stopped midair, eyes turned away, and for a moment I could even hear the beating of my own heart. Not one voice rose to defend me, not even my daughter. Not yet. I felt the weight of 60 years pressing on my chest, not because of age, but because of humiliation. The house I had built, the table I had paid for, the life I had given, all of it suddenly turned against me in that one sentence. And yet, even in that moment of shame, I stayed silent, because sometimes silence is not weakness. It's the quiet before the storm. I want you to imagine this with me. A man lives 6 long decades. He buries his parents with trembling hands. He raises children when he himself is hungry. He builds walls with his sweat and fills them with laughter that does not come from him, but from those he loves. He thinks, by 60, no insult can shake him, because he has survived poverty, betrayal, loneliness, and endless nights of pain. But then comes a wound sharper than death itself, when the respect you held as the head of the family shatters like glass in front of the very people you fed with your hands. That's when 60 years feel like a curse, not a blessing. People think age makes you weak. They think gray hair means defeat. But what they don't understand is that gray hair hides wars they can never fight, scars they can never see, and patience they can never imagine. I wasn't trembling because I was weak. I was trembling because I was containing a storm inside me. If I had let it out, that house would have burned that very night. When you reach my age, silence becomes your weapon. I have swallowed words that could split hearts in half. I have buried secrets that could destroy lives. So when my son-in-law looked into my eyes with arrogance dripping from his tongue and said, "Old man, maybe you should keep quiet. This is not your table anymore," he thought he had silenced me. Number. He only awakened a storm that had been sleeping too long. That wedding night, laughter filled every corner of the room, but my soul was suffocating. The sound of glasses clinking felt like chains on my heart. The music felt like knives on my skin. Everyone saw the decorations, the flowers, the golden plates, but no one saw an old man dying quietly in his chair. You see, humiliation doesn't kill the body, it kills the soul first. And when the soul dies, justice begins to whisper. Forks froze midair. Even the sound of breathing seemed to stop. My son-in-law leaned back with a smile, confident, proud, and blind to the weight of his own words. He thought it was just a joke, a moment of mockery. But the silence in that room was not ordinary. It was the silence of judgment. Every guest who sat at that table had witnessed something they would never forget. The fall of a father, the shattering of a man's dignity. My eyes searched for my daughter. For a second, she avoided my gaze, and in that second, I felt 60 years of sacrifices collapsing into dust. I remembered nights when I worked 2 shifts so she could sleep peacefully. I remembered selling my wife's jewelry so her education would not stop. I remembered sitting outside hospitals, fasting during Ramadan, while paying bills so she could live healthy. And now, the very man she called her husband was cutting me open with words sharper than knives. But still, I remained silent, because silence is not surrender. Silence is the breath you take before the fire consumes everything. I excused myself quietly and left the table. Outside in the garden, the night air was colder than usual. The flame from the lighter flickered against the night breeze, trembling just like my fingers. I hadn't smoked in years, but that night, I needed the fire more than the nicotine. I took a deep drag, and with every cloud of smoke, I wished I could breathe out the weight of 60 years, the pain, the sacrifices, the unspoken words. But smoke fades, and wounds don't. Behind me, the doors creaked open. I didn't turn at first. I thought it would be one of the servants clearing dishes, or maybe a guest too polite to pretend nothing had happened. But then I heard footsteps, soft, hesitant, familiar. My daughter. For a moment I didn't want to face her. A part of me feared she would come only to defend her husband, to cover his arrogance with excuses, to add salt to my wounds by asking me to let it go. My heart ached with that thought. But when I finally turned, her eyes met mine, and they were not the eyes of a wife. They were the eyes of a daughter, red, swollen, trembling. She sat beside me on the bench, her silence heavier than the insult I had endured. For minutes, we just listened to the crickets, the rustle of leaves, and the sound of my shaky breathing. Finally, she spoke, her voice breaking in pieces. "I can't erase what he said. I can't take back the shame you felt, but I promise you, he will regret tonight." Her words hit harder than my son-in-law's insult, because in that moment, I realized justice wasn't going to come from me. It was going to come from her. I looked at her carefully, trying to read her heart. She wasn't speaking like a child anymore. She wasn't the little girl who once held my hand crossing the street. She wasn't the teenager I used to protect from the cruelties of the world. Tonight, she was steel-sharpened, cold, dangerous. "Daughter," I whispered, "anger can destroy faster than it can heal." She shook her head. "No, this isn't just anger. This is justice. You gave me everything. Your youth, your strength, your life. And he thought he could spit on that. He thought he could mock you in front of the world. No, he doesn't know me. He doesn't know whose daughter I am." Her hand gripped mine tightly, and I felt her pulse racing through her skin. It wasn't weakness, it was fire. The moonlight fell across her face, and for the first time in years, I saw a reflection of myself in her. The stubbornness, the pride, the refusal to bend before cruelty. It was as though my blood had found its voice through her lips. I sighed deeply, torn between fear and pride. "What will you do?" She looked at me, her jaw set, her voice steady. "What I must." And in that moment, I understood. This night was not the end of my humiliation. It was the beginning of something else, something darker, something stronger. The night had passed, but the humiliation did not fade. It lingered in the corners of my mind, like a shadow that refuses to leave, whispering at every heartbeat. Even sleep, which I once thought was a refuge, betrayed me. My thoughts circled endlessly, replaying the scene, dissecting every word, every smirk, every glance. And yet there was no panic, no rage that would make me lash out immediately. Age had taught patience, and patience was my most potent weapon. By morning, the house seemed ordinary, as though nothing had happened. Breakfast was served, voices hummed, and laughter once again filled the walls, but I saw it all through a different lens. The people at that table, the same ones who had witnessed my fall, were unaware that a plan was already forming in silence. I had no intention of rushing to confrontation. Quick revenge is often shallow. True justice is deeper. It is a storm that builds, unseen, unstoppable, and precise. I began observing every detail. My daughter moved with a new confidence, her eyes sharper, her words carefully measured. My son-in-law, arrogant as ever, flaunted his temporary dominance, but arrogance is always fragile, and I had learned long ago where fragility hides. I spent the next few days quietly, interacting normally, smiling when needed, nodding at jokes that had nothing to do with me. People assumed that I had accepted the insult, that I had become an old man who could be mocked with ease. They did not know that inside I was constructing the architecture of their undoing, brick by brick, thought by thought. Every interaction became a test. Who respects who fears who underestimates who. And with each passing day, I gathered pieces of the puzzle. The arrogance of my son-in-law, the indulgence of the guests, the habits of the people around him, all were data points. And like any careful strategist, I filed them away in my mind. Every careless laugh, every slight, every assumption of superiority, they would all serve a purpose later. My daughter watched closely, learning. I did not need to teach her. She understood. Her eyes often met mine, silently asking, "Shall I wait? Shall I act?" And I only nodded subtly. Timing was critical. We were not children playing games. We were masters of the silent storm. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire, I found myself alone in the study. I sat in my chair, not to plan immediate confrontation, but to reflect. 60 years of life had given me insight that few could comprehend. It taught me that power is not always in force. Power is often in patience, in observation, in waiting for the moment when arrogance cannot hide, when pride blinds the mind completely. I remembered every insult I had endured in my life, not just tonight, but every time someone tried to belittle me, every moment I was told I could not achieve something, every failure that others celebrated as my downfall. And now, in this chapter of my life, I would rewrite the story, not through haste, not through chaos, but through the quiet, calculated strength that age grants. My daughter joined me at the doorway, silent as a shadow. She leaned lightly, whispering, "I'm ready when you say so." I smiled faintly, not out of humor, but because I understood completely. This was no longer about humiliation. It was about reclaiming dignity, about ensuring that respect was no longer optional in that house, and we would do it quietly, efficiently, leaving no room for argument or doubt. Days turned into a week, and the household remained unaware. The party laughter, the casual arrogance, the assumptions of superiority, all continued. But behind my calm exterior, I was shaping the first moves of our quiet strategy. It was about creating scenarios, planting small reminders, highlighting weaknesses subtly, ensuring that each action my son-in-law took would lead him closer to his own undoing. My daughter's role became more critical. She acted as though nothing had happened, yet she observed, learned, and adapted. Every gesture, every conversation, every seemingly innocent interaction was part of our silent chessboard. And as she grew more confident, I knew that when the time came, her actions would be precise and devastating, not in anger, but in justice. One afternoon, I invited my son-in-law to join me in the garden, under the pretense of casual conversation. His arrogance remained, thick as ever, with a smirk that suggested he thought he had nothing to fear. But subtle words, carefully placed questions, and small reminders of responsibility slowly began to plant seeds of doubt. Every response he gave revealed more than he intended: his overconfidence, his impatience, his assumptions. I remained calm, polite, almost kind, never raising my voice, never showing anger. He did not realize that his words were being catalogued, that every misstep was being remembered. The storm was forming quietly, and he was the unwitting architect of his own downfall. Evening came, and the sky darkened, reflecting the mood within me. I walked back to my study, where plans were being shaped and ideas refined. Patience was our ally, strategy was our sword, and dignity, long trampled, was the treasure we would reclaim. My daughter followed silently. She understood that we were not merely reacting to insult. We were constructing a story of justice that would be remembered. She would act when the moment was right, not sooner. And when she did, it would not just be a personal victory, it would be a statement to anyone who ever believed that respect could be bought, mocked, or ignored. This was the essence of human-like strategy: patience, calculation, observation, and the quiet certainty that the world eventually balances itself when arrogance meets wisdom. The house looked ordinary from the outside, but inside the air had shifted. My son-in-law still walked with arrogance, still spoke with a sharp tongue, but he didn't realize the ground beneath his feet had started to crack. Every careless word he spoke, every selfish act he displayed, was quietly being noted. He thought he was winning, but in reality, he was walking deeper into the trap of his own pride. My daughter had grown colder in her silence. She didn't argue with him anymore. She didn't confront him directly. Instead, she allowed him to expose himself, to family, to friends, to those who once admired him. Arrogance has a way of burning its own bridges, and she simply lit the matches he was too blind to see. One evening at another family dinner, he once again mocked me, this time more subtle, a careless comment about old men holding on to the past. The table laughed politely, but my daughter didn't. She placed her fork down gently, looked straight at him, and said in a voice calm but cutting, "Funny how the past built everything you're sitting on right now." The room froze. He tried to laugh it off, but there was no laughter to back him this time. Eyes turned to him, not in admiration, but in quiet judgment. My daughter had not shouted. She had not insulted. She had only reminded everyone of a truth so sharp that it left him exposed. That was the first strike. Not loud, not violent, but precise. Respect, once questioned, had begun to shift back to its rightful place. That night he confronted her in anger. I could hear their voices through the walls, his harsh, hers steady. He accused her of betrayal, of disrespect, of siding with me, but she stood firm, her voice like steel wrapped in calmness. "You humiliated my father in front of everyone. You thought it was a joke. But you don't know me. You don't know the blood that runs in my veins. You will learn." Those words echoed through the walls and into my heart. For the first time in years, I felt a strange kind of pride. Not for myself, but for the strength I saw in her. She was no longer just my daughter. She was my justice. Over the next few days, the cracks widened. Friends and relatives who once admired my son-in-law began to notice his arrogance more clearly. My daughter never argued directly, but she would drop truths in the middle of conversations like arrows piercing through lies. "He never built anything of his own," she'd say casually. "Everything he enjoys today exists because of the man he insulted." And slowly, His laughter grew quieter. His arrogance faltered. He began to realize he was not as untouchable as he thought. This was the essence of justice, not sudden revenge, but the slow unraveling of pride until a man has nowhere left to hide. And I simply watched, silent, patient, because I knew the real storm was yet to come. Days passed, but the silence inside the house was no longer the silence of peace. It was the silence before collapse, the kind of silence when a storm is gathering on the horizon, waiting for its moment to strike. My son-in-law still carried himself with arrogance, but his laughter was weaker now. His eyes darted more often, searching for approval that wasn't there anymore. The family had begun to notice. Relatives who once praised him now exchanged uneasy glances. Friends who once admired him now avoided his company. Respect, that fragile treasure he had mocked, was slipping through his fingers. And all it took was one sentence, spoken by my daughter, to expose him. He thought it was just a wound, but arrogance does not bleed silently. It poisons itself. The final moment came on a night he believed would restore his pride. He had organized a gathering at the house, inviting friends, business partners, and family. The table was once again filled with laughter, glasses clinking, food served in excess. It looked like the same setting where my humiliation had begun, but this time something had changed. I sat at the same table, quiet, observing. My daughter, calm and composed, sat beside him, and as the evening went on, he could not resist. His pride would not let him. Once again he tried to mock me. A comment slipped from his lips, sharper than he intended, directed at me, the old man who lives on memories. But this time, before silence could settle, my daughter stood up. Her voice cut through the air like lightning. "Enough!" The room froze. All eyes turned to her. She was not shouting, but her tone carried the weight of years, the authority of truth. "You humiliated the man who built this house, who fed this family, who sacrificed his life so we could sit at this table. You thought his silence was weakness. You thought his patience was surrender. But tonight, everyone will know what it truly was. Dignity. And dignity is something you will never understand." Gasps filled the room. Some lowered their eyes in shame, others in disbelief. My son-in-law tried to laugh, to dismiss her words as emotional outburst, but no one laughed with him. His voice cracked, his smirk failed, the mask of confidence fell, and for the first time, everyone saw him as he truly was, small, fragile, and pitiful. I remained seated, my silence speaking louder than his excuses, because in that moment, justice did not come from my anger. It came from my daughter's truth, and truth, once spoken, cannot be silenced. He left the table in rage, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed like a broken crown hitting the floor. That night, his arrogance died. He would live, he would walk, he would eat, but he would never again hold the power he thought he had. The respect I had lost was no longer mine to reclaim. It was given back to me by the very daughter he tried to control, and that was the sweetest justice of all. After the guests left, the house was quiet again. My daughter sat beside me, her hand resting gently on mine. Her eyes were softer now, no longer filled with fire, but with peace. "I told you, father," she whispered. "He would regret that night." I looked at her, my heart heavy with pride. "You didn't just defend me. You reminded the world what respect means. For that, I will forever be grateful." Tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled through them. And in that moment, I knew justice had been served, not with violence, not with cruelty, but with truth, patience, and dignity. Life didn't become perfect after that. People still carried their flaws, mistakes still happened, and pain still found its way into the house. But one thing never changed again: my place at that table. No one ever dared question it. No one ever dared mock it, because everyone remembered the night when silence turned into storm, when patience turned into justice, and when a daughter became her father's shield. And as for me, I did not seek revenge anymore. I did not need it. Revenge is temporary, but respect, once regained, is eternal. If you've walked with me through this journey, through humiliation, patience, and justice, then you know one thing: silence is not weakness. Dignity is not surrender. And when justice comes, it comes quietly, powerfully, leaving scars that arrogance can never heal. Stories like these remind us that respect must never be taken for granted. And if you believe in justice, in patience, and in the power of truth, then support this journey. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because there are more stories waiting, stories that will remind you that in the end, truth always wins.